He is professor of practice at Duke University in the Sanford School of Public Policy. He graduated from Princeton University with a BA degree in 1977. He got a law degree from Duke in 1984. He's involved in numerous campaigns and also at one time served as a clerk on the 6th Appellate Court, and also had been a practicing attorney in the same law firm as Terry Sanford. So when you say professor practices, that he actually practiced what he preached at one time, and he does know about North Carolina. And the reason we thought about bringing him tonight, we had a board meeting here back on December 1st talking about a lot of things, some that will never be mentioned in public record, about our most recent election and about why we can't continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. In particular, we cannot continue to hope that demographically this state is automatically going to turn purple. We're not Georgia, we're not Virginia, we're not Arizona. They have different things going for them, and we have got to come to grips with the reality of North Carolina. And as someone whose parents came from McDowell County, which is one of the reddest counties in this state, and also as someone who once had someone told him that Randolph County was the land of the saints amidst the island of sinners. That's because Randolph always votes Republican. We got to do something about addressing the what Mac calls the countrypolitan counties. How can we stop the bleeding? So without further ado, Mac is going to talk about 15-20 minutes, and then he'll open up questions. So welcome, Mac McCorkle.
Well, Henry set me up perfectly for what I want to talk about, because I do want to talk about 2020 and 22, but also look towards the future. And Henry has also said, I teach at the Sanford School, and one of the courses I teach is a very historically oriented course on the politics and policy of North Carolina. Half North Carolinians, half non-North Carolinians. So a lot of people don't know anything about North Carolina. And so I start the course off with a quote, a very historically based quote, from none other than Thomas Jefferson, who, a very nervous Thomas Jefferson, in 1800 was writing to a Virginia supporter, talking about North Carolina. And the line that Thomas Jefferson had was, "The political mind of North Carolina is mysterious to us." And so it has stayed mysterious for a lot of us for a long, long time. And frustrating, because I've been here since the early 1980s, which in North Carolina, Durham terms, I almost consider myself a native because of that. Because of North Carolina's reputation, somewhat well-deserved, as the New South progressive state before any other southern state, and a lot of great accomplishments. And so we keep on coming close but no cigar, in terms of especially the U.S. Senate and presidential races, what I call the federal statewide races. And the frustration there is really in the modern political history, now we use the word modern in that sense, we've only won Senate races 4 times. Robert Morgan in the Watergate years, my mentor Terry Sanford in 1986, John Edwards in 1998, and Kay Hagan in 2008. And we did not defend any 3 of those. We lost, and Senator Edwards went on to do other things and did not stand for re-election. And we broke the Clintons' hearts a number of times in presidential races, and we have to go all the way back to Jimmy Carter to win the Democratic presidential candidate one year, except for the one shining moment of Barack Obama in 2008. So it is frustrating, no question. But at the same time, I don't want to be contributing to Democrats getting into a circular firing squad and firing off with each other. Because what we also need to factor in is the longer history, which is the North Carolina Democratic Party, like every other Southern Democratic Party, was a Jim Crow Democratic Party that we are not proud of in our history. And it has transitioned probably better than any Southern Democratic Party. Now that might not be saying a lot to some people, but still in terms of the South, has transitioned. And what we need to remember is, despite all the frustration that we've gone through in the federal statewide races, we have won 7, and I'm a professor, but tonight I'm a Democrat. It's the story about, are you Christian tonight? I'm a Democrat tonight, not a professor tonight. We've won 7 of 8 governor's races, and maybe we'll win the next 2. So that we really have a record here in the governor's races. It's unparalleled. People like to talk about Georgia. Henry's already mentioned that. Georgia is completely red, except for the Herschel Walker race and the Senate race in 2020 with John Ossoff. Here we have governor, attorney general, secretary of state. We have a presence on the council, on the state council. So, and barely, yes. I knew Paul would say that. And the turn really was with my mentor, Terry Sanford, in 1960, turning this state, at least fitfully, awkwardly, but into accepting the civil rights movement in a way that no other southern state did. And what we transitioned to is a state party that was Jim Crow rural into one that is urban, it's multiracial, that has brought in a lot of higher educated people into the fold. And that's why we get close, but not far enough, because that's where it ends. I call one way of thinking of our coalition is the 2 U's, university and urban, and loyal black voters everywhere throughout the state of North Carolina. But otherwise, in terms of where white voters have a say, it's a lot of 2 U's. That's the 10 bigger city counties. Now, when I used to teach this at Duke, I called them urban, and I had a student from Los Angeles, and she raised her hand and said, "Is any place in North Carolina urban?" So I'll use bigger cities. But interestingly enough, the demarcation seems to be in cities that are 90,000 and above, except for one countrypolitan city now, Concord in Cabarrus, which is changing a little bit too. But if it's 90,000 and above, Democrats are incredibly strong and do well. We've had turnout problems, but I'm talking about the margin is very strong in those areas. And what I want to emphasize is that in very good Democratic years nationally, our coalition is strong enough to win. I'll maybe come back to that at the end. That's what happened in 2008. Republicans were dispirited. We had an extraordinary candidate in Barack Obama. Of course, all my candidates won that year, and everybody says it was because of Obama. And I always say, no, it was my brilliance that helped 2008. I'm not a consultant who says things like that. That was my last year, actually. So in very good years, we don't want to downgrade what Democrats have done and what Democrats can accomplish. The problem is when it's not a very good Democratic year nationally, that's where the frustration happens. That's where we get close and don't really win. Another way of putting it is that we have not been able to establish a durable Democratic majority to make this a blue state in elections. We can win sometimes, but usually, especially in the federal races, we've been losing. So as Henry was saying, are we a purple state? Maybe we're kind of purple with a lot of crimson in the coloration. And a lot of this is the critique of myself. We've been talking about how we're just on the cusp of changing things in North Carolina. And I was the deputy campaign manager for Harvey Gantt. With Mike, we worked with Mike on that. And right after that, I wrote an article. It was over 30 years ago. I was youthful. And I wrote an article saying, North Carolina is just on the cusp of becoming a progressive state. You know, there was a real, in the last 2 weeks, there was a possibility that Gantt was going to win that race. I mean, it was that close in many respects. So I wrote this buoyant article, youthful article, saying it's going to happen. And now, after more than 30 years later, in Senate races, we're in the same position. So we're on the cusp. And this is after lots of demographic change in the state. So I think, again, to pick up what Henry said, I am very much a believer in we should quit talking about demography as destiny. If it happens, if North Carolina keeps changing and we get Yankees and more Democrats in and we get a higher people of color percentage in the electorate, that's great. But to assume that's going to happen is part of, I think, has been part of our problem. Just to go back, in 2020, President Biden loses here by 70,000 votes. Chris Cooper from Western Carolina calls us the bluest of red states because it's so close. Sherry Beasley loses in 2022 by basically 140,000, 70,000 more than Biden. And there were problems in the base turnout, especially in Charlotte, that, of course, in 2022 was not as good of a year for Democrats nationally as it was in 2018. So it's kind of expected in many respects that you could say it could be tougher. So we had a base problem in 2022. But when you look at the numbers, and I haven't computed them all, by the way, for 2020, Henry has my analysis for 2020 if you want to see that. It's striking how similar the Biden and the Beasley vote is. Bud does a little better in most places than Trump, holds on to the Trump counties. Beasley loses a couple Biden counties, but you look at the vote and its polarization all the way down the ticket in 2022, polarization all the way down the ticket in 2020, and very similar dimensions to what's going on in 20 as well as 22, with some drop off. And what is that dimension? Again, in the 10 bigger city counties, and that's from not just Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Raleigh-Wake, but Pitt, Greenville, Asheville, Buncombe, Fayetteville, Guilford, Greensboro, all of those are strong Democratic polls. Our vote turnout was a little down. Our vote percentage was a little off from 2020 in that. But where do we lose then? Because a lot of people say, well, it's an urban-rural divide in North Carolina. True. But the number of votes that come out of the top 10 counties compared to the votes that come out of rural and small town North Carolina, or what the census and the Office of Management Budget would call non-metro North Carolina, the urban vote dwarfs the rural and small town vote. What we point out is that there are 28 counties on the fringes of the metropolitan areas that are considered metropolitan. We call them countrypolitan. I'll get to more of that because they have country small town roots. Some of y'all may have come from those counties. And what happens is Democrats come out of Charlotte with strong majorities. Again, we had some trouble in 2022, but still came out with strong majorities. Charlotte is most of Mecklenburg, but Mecklenburg, the Democrats don't lose that much momentum anymore outside of Charlotte. And then they hit that wall around Charlotte, which is Gaston County, Union County, Lincoln, Iredell County. And Republicans are winning, and they've been winning this way for years, 70, 65, 70%, 20% margins. There's one perhaps canary in the coal mine to watch for, Cabarrus County, where Concord is now a big city by North Carolina terms. And we've been cutting the margin there. We had a real upset victory in a House race in Cabarrus. So maybe we can look forward to that. But in other areas, you think of Wake County coming out strong, Raleigh and Wake County, But you hit Johnston and Franklin, they're not big enough to cut into the margin like they are in Charlotte as badly, but they still cut into the margin. The greatest source of Democratic strength in terms of votes usually now is Durham Chapel Hill. Way smaller than Wake and in Mecklenburg, but way stronger throughout. Chatham County is one of the few countrypolitan counties. It's on the fringe of the Chapel Hill, Durham metropolitan statistical area that is going Democrat. It's almost becoming connected to Orange County. But all the other ones around Greensboro, around Winston-Salem, around Fayetteville now, Pender County with next New Hanover, all cut the margin. Even, get this, guess where Donald Trump got most of his votes? Did he get most votes in the 25 most rural counties in North Carolina, the 25 small town micropolitan counties, or in the urban counties? He got his most vote in the countrypolitan counties by far, his highest percentage and his biggest numbers. That's also what was I consider decisive in the Bud Beasley race. Why do I call it countrypolitan? I've already said countrypolitan is country roots. I use the word, maybe anybody with country music roots would know this. Countrypolitan refers to the moment in country music after World War II when country music moved from kind of hillbilly music to a more slick violin, Moog synthesizer kind of feel in the 50s. Chet Atkins moved around, was very important in that. Now you think of Faith Hill and Tim McGraw and numerous others. A lot of country people didn't like that because it was kind of synthetic. But that's part of why I call it countrypolitan, because these areas like Union County, Johnston County, they're not rural in this old traditional sense. There are all kinds of developments going on, all kinds of economy. They commute in to Wake County. Over 50% of the workforce in Johnston travels outside the county. So to call that rural, I don't really think captures it. But it's these hybrid counties. Now, some of them are not as bustling and growth-oriented as Union and Johnston. The ones around Greensboro and Winston-Salem, Rockingham, various places, have economic problems. I'm not saying that. But they're connected to the cities in some way. But they're not voting with the cities. So I talk about the 28 counties, but as I was saying to somebody here already, you might want to think about North Carolina, that everything outside of the 10 big city counties and the university towns is countrypolitan. You might even want to think of Andrew Jackson before he moved to Tennessee in this kind of countrypolitan mode of conservative, not liberal, but hybrid, and maybe could be moved across again, not so much that we would win in the countrypolitan counties, but if we could cut the margin from 20 and 30% losses to what we're doing now in Cabarrus, Sherry Beasley would be our senator, and Joe Biden would have won North Carolina for sure. I'll give you the example. Union County is a good example. Not fiscal conservatism there. They have very high debt. They provided lots of amenities for their schools and for transportation, and so they are not old school fiscal conservatives. At some point, they might have a reckoning in Union County, given how much they've been debt financing a lot of amenities. But my point really is that it's not old school Jesse Helms. Union County is Monroe, where Senator Helms is from. Those were some of my first races. I think I lost to Senator Helms 3 times, or I don't know. I hate to even remember that. But Monroe is a good example of optimism in the sense that in Monroe in 2020, there was not a Republican on the city council in Jesse Helms' old town. It was a multiracial coalition of Democrats and independents on the city council. Now, within the larger Union County, there were 5 middle-aged, overweight white guys in blue blazers if you went to the Union County site. The Monroe was very different. One of the problems, though, was in 2021, the Republicans took back seats on the Monroe City Council. So you can already see where I'm going. While we have these problems inside these red countrypolitan counties, there are blue pockets of support that I think we have not been focused on enough. And the little research that I've been able to exactly do, talk about depressed turnout in these Democratic pockets of countrypolitan counties. It kind of makes sense, right? That we win those pockets, but we don't win them anywhere near the turnout that we need. So I feel like they've been ignored some. Now, I say ignored. A lot of this is about money. And when you don't have the national party supporting you like we didn't in 2022, and we can argue about that till the cows come home, it's very hard to talk about how to allocate resources. But I feel like in the Democratic Party that we have got to move beyond kind of this turnout idea, which is, it's October, let's go get votes. That's really important. But before October, what are we doing to build generational leadership in these blue pockets? Let me just, you can go down the list of countrypolitan areas. Gastonia, Gaston is a huge Republican area, but in Gastonia, Democratic mayor, Democratic city council. I'll list off other areas. Hendersonville, outside in Henderson County, Roxborough, Oxford, Reedsville, and then outside of the countrypolitan ambit, but you could consider them countrypolitan in the larger sense. Morgantown, Newbern, Burlington, Goldsboro, Sanford, Beaufort, even Albemarle has some Democratic leanings. And I like to say, people always talk about Transylvania in the West as just a wasteland. Well, we're breaking over 40% in Transylvania County. So certain things are going on that I think if we could focus on, but I don't think it's just a matter. It is a matter of thinking about turnout in those areas. It's also a matter of talking about building up an infrastructure and supporting people who are running for city council, who are running for county commissioner, and board seats that are very, very important. Okay, so that sounds depressing, I know, because we need to be focused on turnout. Look, we lost seats in the state legislature in 2022 in rural, in northeastern North Carolina. That's got to be the focus to pick those back up. This is the larger strategy that I think we have to move to, especially not for just for statewide, but the problem now that's becoming so obvious is our problem in state legislative races. That you might want to argue still that if you could get every last person in Wake County and Mecklenburg County who should be Democrats to vote for Democrats, we might win the race. And there's argument in 2022 that if young people had come out and black voters had come out as strongly as they have been in 2018, Sherry Beasley would have won. Even if that is true, the problem is that is no strategy for having legislative majorities. The only way we're going to get to legislative majorities is to spread the Democratic support out beyond the 2U areas. Now, one thing we talk about, rural North Carolina, it's all Republican. But remember, Biden, Roy Cooper, Democrats win some rural counties in North Carolina. It is, to be bluntly put it, it's white voters in rural counties are Trump. But that doesn't mean that all rural counties are lost. My point is we keep looking at the rural areas and not at the countrypolitan areas as problematic. Talking about gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, we have now, with the loss of the Supreme Court, we probably will have no protection from Republican gerrymandering. We got to 7-7 in the congressional district, thanks to some of the candidates that the Republicans ran. But that could be changed very quickly, unfortunately. And we don't even know whether they would try that in the legislative seats. So we have no alternative, it seems to me, but to get beyond a kind of 2U university town urban strategy and working for the future. Now, when I talk about the future, that again may sound pessimistic. Well, what are we going to do in the interim? Despite everything I've said, 2024 may be a very good year for Democrats nationally. Watching Speaker McCarthy's appeasement show the last 10 days, you might get that idea. Perhaps Lieutenant Governor Robinson may be the Doug Mastriano of North Carolina, and we have a big Democratic year. So we shouldn't be totally pessimistic. If it's a good Democratic year, our coalition is strong enough to take advantage of that and to have big results just like we had in 08. The problem is long term, though, is we've got to start thinking about how can we move North Carolina beyond this kind of limbo on the cusp status to a true blue majority state. And again, especially if we're going to do that in the state legislatures, state legislative seats. Because again, some state legislative races, Sherry Beasley did better than a lot of our state legislative candidates because I think people thought, oh, that's a big important race, and they didn't even know what was happening at the lower level. Unless we move to a larger strategy trying to win more of North Carolina, or another way of putting it is lose less in countrypolitan areas, we don't really have a shot at making North Carolina a blue state. It might be a purple state. We may win some. We may win more than we lose. We may lose more than we win. But to move to the blue status, we've got to get beyond this kind of 2U of university and urban areas. Let me take questions after that.
Mac, I'm a Gaston County fisherman, and you told us where to fish. If you're going to catch fish, you got to know where to go. And you got to take a rod, and that's the infrastructure. But you also got to know what to put on the hook. What do we need to be saying out in these countrypolitan areas? Because it's not enough to have the infrastructure, although that's important.
Yeah.
We got to have a message. And it seems to me, from Gaston County, messages that worked in Wake and Mecklenburg were not helpful in Gaston County.
Messages in Wake and Mecklenburg either.
We didn't have much of a message there. Well, two things. I would rather hear from the leaders on the city council and the mayor of Gaston and of Roxborough and of Beaufort of all places, and get them more involved in the party. I hear what you're saying. I don't think that they are necessarily conservative folks, the ones I've talked to. I think they might be more heterodox in their viewpoints. They're not going to think consistent liberal. But what I like most about thinking about trying to raise up that generation of leadership there is they know that destiny is not on their side. They know they're the underdog. So that's what I really like about these areas. I don't think that now when I say Democratic leadership, a lot of these people are nonpartisan. I'm talking about how they're registered on that. But I would really like to hear from them rather than from us to go to a message on that. I would think they're all for expanding Medicaid. I would think that they're not they probably don't have any want to do with the right-wing evangelical agenda. So to me, they're good enough Democrats for me, for sure.
Do you think gerrymandering has a spillover effect on other races because of the fact that it gives the Republicans high visibility and help in organizing even for other races?
Well, no question that. But my point is that we are sitting ducks for the Republican gerrymandering because our vote is way too concentrated in these 10 urban counties. But yeah, no, I think there is a sense that I get from talking to people who, these blue dots in these red sea, they look at the situation and they think this is hopeless. And there is a sense in which the Republicans have been able to project that this is a completely red state with a supermajority. Unfortunately, they may have a majority in the state legislature. If it was a clean slate election, it would be really tough. But to be near supermajority as they are is because of gerrymandering. But the problem is we have made ourselves sitting ducks because of the concentration of our vote. When you got the vote concentrated like we do, and votes are not wasted, but not needed as much, then you're going to be subject to all kinds of gerrymandering. And again, so we just have to deal with that because now the Supreme Court they've taken over the Supreme Court, so there's going to be no protection from the gerrymandering. So.
I have some doubt that looking to the urban leadership is the way to go. Because number one, they are nonpartisan. And they try to stay away from any partisan politics, either Democrat or Republican. Secondly,
And that's probably why they got elected in some ways.
Yeah. and then secondly, much of the vote is not under their urban control. We look into the suburban area, which is a different type of vote. So somebody else, where do we look then for ways to spread out the Democratic?
Well, the way I think about it, and I think about Union County, those people who are maybe more like the people in Clayton now, very strong Democratic, becoming a strong Democratic stronghold in Wake County, might be moving into Union, but that's demography, that's not strategy. What I'm pointing out, though, is I do think there are areas like Monroe, like Gastonia, that even though the leadership has been elected in most cases as nonpartisan, if we could move them into the city council, if there was a big D Democratic culture built up there, I think we would lose less. I don't think we would win, but I think we would lose less. But I hear you. I mean, part of surviving in these red counties is the nonpartisan. One of the things that the Republicans, though, are going to keep on driving on us is more and more everything is going to be partisan where strategically is so. So in some ways or another, people are going to have to be coming out clearly for Democrats. But I take a lot of solace in the fact that we have people who are in city governments in these blue pockets who clearly affiliate with the Democratic Party. If they were totally nonpartisan, they would be independents. But I'm talking about people who affiliate with the Democratic Party.
Could we hear from the chair from Harnett County?
Yes.
Matt, so based upon some of your words and theories of building generational leadership and infrastructure to have a Democratic coalition on the local level, not even at the General Assembly, just talking about the local level, do you think we should be party blind?
Party blind?
Party blind, you know, the old colorblind, now it's party blind. Because, and try to work with those elected officials who are typically Republican, but they're not, you know, I think the bulk of them are centrist Republicans, to basically to try to put our beliefs into their deliberations about the issues, as well as take our licks when they say, not on your life am I going to vote that way, as well as to try to educate and expand their thinking. Because if the Republicans are going to go more partisan, should we go more, party blind?
Big Tent.
So that we do build that coalition, because we don't have Harnett doesn't have the leadership.
No, I hear what you're saying. I'd put it this way,
Generational.
Utah, clearly, in a place like Utah, and you saw that with the independent who ran there, and in the West, Democrats are going to have to move to that. I think, to be honest with you, we're still too close to winning here for that to be a statewide strategy. But in places like Harnett and statewide, we need to be the big tent party. The Republicans are giving us an incredible opportunity to do that, to bring Republicans and independents. And we got to remember, independents, even though most people in North Carolina end up voting straight Republican or Democrat, that is the largest registration now. And at some point, Mike Bitzer at Catawba College talks about what's going on in North Carolina as calcification, that is, as I said, we're just doing the same thing. The Democrats are coming, Republicans are coming, and they're voting the same way. At some point, those bones are going to break. And part of that is the independents. So should Democrats be wide open to independents? Absolutely. We need to be a big tent party. But I don't think we have to go to the extent of being party blind. We're going to be Democrats, in my view, on that.
I have a comment about the theory of motivation and need. When you talk about these areas that are around Charlotte and so forth, I think there is a lot of potential there. But upward mobility is a real problem. Someone said in the News and Observer some time back, if you're born poor in Raleigh of this area,
Your life chances,
and
yeah.
then I think the incentive, we often wait from one election to the next election, got to slow down. And we're not building our grassroots. And so I think what you said is right on the money. It may not be those hardcore people, but those fringes, we could build a lot of momentum, but we got to get them to the point that they trust us again.
Yes. Yeah. No, right. And again, 5 to 10% in a lot of these countrypolitan areas, which I think, I don't want to totally dump on demography. Things are changing in those areas, but the comparison is Atlanta. Rockdale County, anybody know Rockdale is one of those metro counties outside of Atlanta. 10 or 15 years ago, that was a countrypolitan county. Very hybrid, some liberals, but mainly conservatives. And they liked country music. They kind of thought they were urban. They weren't really sure about it. Those areas now, because of the attraction of Atlanta, have become so racially diverse, so highly educated, that the areas outside of Atlanta are almost voting the same way that Cobb County is. Not even, maybe in some cases, stronger. We've yet to see that in North Carolina. Northern Virginia is another good example.
Yeah.
Washington's just invaded Northern Virginia, and all the Democrats are down there. So I like to say, in North Carolina, we got to do it the hard way. Virginia got a gift from Washington, and Atlanta is a capital for people of color that I don't think we're ever going to have in the state. But my example, I also work on RTP. Boston and we talk about Silicon Valley and Boston, how they were so high-tech oriented. They got all kinds of federal government contracts. You look at RTP, and that was the hard way. It failed a number of times, and Senator Sanford had to cut some deals with the Kennedys and do some other things to get things going. It finally got going, but North Carolina has to do it the hard way. So I'm not talking about those countrypolitan counties that we're going to win them anytime soon. If we do, that's just great. Maybe we would win Cabarrus County. But if we could just get, as you say, more trust for Democratic candidates. And so instead of just in October saying, well, let's go get those people to vote. Too late, way too late. Yeah. Yes, sir. And then we'll go over here.
I'm marveled with your terminology of coalition. Does your data and research truly define what that coalition truly is? Does it really reach in and define the coalitions that you're speaking of?
No, I wish I could say it did, but it's clearly the coalition that works in these big city counties. I mean, some people refer to it as the old Atlanta coalition of higher educated whites and blacks and other minorities. But let's face it, in North Carolina, we're still waiting for the Latino vote to rock in and count. It still is very, very small. So I'll say white and black just to be blunt about that. And in the lower class votes. The problem is in the middle class. And that's where we've got to fight. Now, I'm writing another paper. This is all strategy. But I'm very big on saying we have got to fight for the words freedom and opportunity. Have got to be democratic words. We got to contest those words. Freedom, opportunity, and liberty. We have different definitions than Republicans, but too many times, I think a lot of just, I'll call them regular, non-progressive, non-conservative people vote Republican out of default. because they think, well, those Democrats, except, unless maybe Trump now running, those Democrats are a little way out for me. And I think that's because we've let a lot of words and language go to their side that we shouldn't. I don't know if that's helpful.
It does scratch the surface, but we were having this small discussion here about Georgia. And I can clearly say from the coalitions that we built in Georgia, in 16, Ossoff was so afraid that he was going to lose the black vote that he coalesced with the black people because he said, I need your vote.
Yeah.
In this last election, we got Ossoff to come into the coalition again because we wanted to get Warnock elected because we saw from the demographics in that coalition that white vote was not going to just bring him across the threshold.
No, not in Georgia.
There was such a bad candidate on the other side. The fear factor came in.
Yeah.
So, when you're trying to define these coalitions, I'm hearing you, and I agree with you 100%. That's where the real opportunity are. We just need that data that really defines where they are.
I'll keep working to do that.
Yeah.
The thing on Georgia, though, is, it has gotten to the point where the voter pool is in the low 30s, and Georgia's clicking in at the high 20s, even in a bad year. Arguably, this year was a little off of black voters. In North Carolina, we're struggling to in the low 20s and getting it above 20. So that means, the white voters in Georgia are still way more conservative than the voters here in North Carolina. So that's frustrating. That's what makes it hard coalitionally in North Carolina.
I think when you talk about gerrymandering, we lost the legislature before the primary because so many of the legislative seats went unopposed. So there's some strategy in terms of the Democratic Party not doing their job. I absolutely agree with Matt, and I ran a statewide campaign just this last time based on this research, and it works. But we have to communicate, we have to work in coalitions, and we have to not ignore every county. Transylvania is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hear all the time, Transylvania's a wasteland. That's where Madison, Cawthorn,
No.
And we're over 40% and have some competitive candidates there. So, yes, sir. And I'll go to Colin. Yeah.
One of the biggest changes in Democratic strategy that it seems to me, I worked in the Obama campaign, 2008. He had offices all over Wake County. We had more ground people than we needed in the office I worked in. We had young people, we had all kinds of people. I tried to do some volunteer work later, and they said, well, we think now the emphasis is on TV. Because
And no yard signs.
yeah, that's how you reach more people. Well, we won that election and we've lost some since. And so I guess my question is, you talk about you got to work with these people in, what did you call them,
countrypolitan
places?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got to work with them. Who's going to work with them?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got to have foot soldiers on the ground. You can't just give them a phone call and say,
Right.
hey, we like you.
And look, I mean, now I'm in my professor's armchair. I don't want to be criticizing my successors who are doing work. A lot of this would be solved if there was enough money to go around to do a lot of interesting things. So, for instance, in 2024, I'm telling people we got to be concerned about countrypolitan counties. If I were back on the other side, I'd be thinking about those counties that we lost in northeastern North Carolina because we won them, so we got to get them back. So it's a confluence of a lot of different things. But what I think we can do, without any question, and I will just admit this again, this self-critique, I didn't know we had a Democratic mayor and Democratic city council in Gastonia until I read it in the New York Times in 2020. I didn't know. The mayor of Beaufort called me, and he has some Duke connections. He said, I'm running for Senate. And I went, in the Democratic primary? He says, oh yeah, I'm the mayor of Beaufort, North Carolina. I didn't know that because why? I'm so Raleigh triangle centric. So just bringing those people, those mayors and city councils to people's attention and bringing them into the party and doing what we can, I think could be very helpful, even if we don't have tons of money. Even if we don't. Colin.
Man, what do you think are issues that resonate with people in countrypolitan areas that cause them to vote Republican? Or is it perception of what they believe are the Democratic positions based on national?
Yeah, exactly. I think there are some issue differences. I think it is the cultural feel that people get from urban and university presentations of self, I guess you'd say. Because I don't think the voters we need in those counties, I'll put it that way, there's some real hard right voters we ain't ever getting in those counties. But there are enough people who are fine with Medicaid expansion. They might even be single payer. They might also be not too hot on abortion. So it's going to be very difficult in some ways of dealing with people who are not ideologically down the line. But I don't think it's issues as much of a cultural thing. That's why I think I want to know, I'd love to see involved in the party the mayor of Gastonia and the city council. I wish that they had roles in the party and could speak to the party. Because again, as I was saying before, I think they're progressive enough. They might even be more progressive than we think. But what they really are is they know how tough it is to get every vote. They're opportunistic and they're underdogs. So that's what I like about them.
Two more questions. First, Rebecca, and then Tanyetta.
Yeah, good.
Rebecca.
Yeah, I want to kind of go back to the gentleman who talked about working for the Obama campaign and kind of set something off for me. And that is the disconnect between the national and state and local parties. It is the hardest thing to work around.
And she used to be the Wake County Party chair.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and Wake County in general is a very organized county. But because, they want to run up votes here, everybody pours all the resources in here that maybe could be going to some of these wraparound counties.
Yeah.
And it's just frustrating because, like this gentleman said, we have more people that we can use in a lot of ways. We want them all to stay and volunteer, but there's where is that decision making coming from?
Yeah, no, and it's a lot of it is triage and a lot of it is hard decisions, but I do think we are dangerously, we worry about turnout in Charlotte being low. And it's like, oh, let's go get the voters. It's time to go get voters in October. My sense in the 21st century is that's a diminishing story. So I'm all for, the newest fad of door knocking and we got to do all those kind of things. But I think that's not seeing the importance of laying a groundwork for people's voices in the parties rather than votes. Just votes. It's voices, not just votes.
Tanyetta.
I'm a social worker, so I have the privilege of speaking to, I tell people I have the best job because culture. He talked a little bit about it over there, but I just wanted to know, based on the data and just my conversations with so many people, when it came to the message, like I've told people that abortion, I know some Democrats that terminology just could not vote Democrat because that word abortion, because of beliefs, religion, culture. Then you have some Asians, I know some individuals who have to vote the way their husbands vote. So how does this play a factor when it comes to voting? Because that's huge. And some of them they believe in some of the Democratic issues, but if my husband vote Republican, I have to vote Republican. Or my beliefs, my culture, my stance on issues. So sometimes it's also the message that the Democrats.
Well, this is a problem for Democrats and Republicans in the sense that, the best research actually suggests that most people non-college educated, most people, not like us, but, people who aren't partisans in race, are neither liberal nor conservative. They're both. There's some liberal on some issues and conservative on others. Rarely are they kind of in that moderate. Sometimes they're moderate, but they're all over the place. And so it's very difficult for either party to have a message that doesn't alienate people. My hope is that the Republicans are giving us the opportunity for the Democrats to say, we truly are the big tent party. So you can disagree with us on this and that, but we still want you to be a Democrat. because we all want to expand Medicaid or whatever the issue is. But we are not, one of the problems with the turnout idea is let's go get those voters. And demographically, they look like they're Democrats. We're finding more and more that those people who aren't voting may demographically look like that, but are different political breed. And they might even not like politics that much. So it's a very difficult message. So overarching any particular issue is this big tent view that I think we've got to, and the Republicans are giving us that opportunity.
One last one from Rebecca, and then we have to wrap up.
Again, I'm sorry. The big push lately has also been register as many people as you can, go out and register voters, go out and register voters. Is that an effective use of resources?
Absolutely necessary and essential. But I'm suggesting, and again, that's where the first money's got to go. It can't go to what I'm talking about. But what's going to happen is, to kind of go back to the theme, that's not going to change where we are. What that's going to do is, in a good Democratic year, we're going to win. In a bad Democratic year, we're not going to win. So we've got to find some way to go beyond that. And of course, money. What?
Which organizations, which PACs?
Well, some of these new organizations, I like the North Carolina Rural Project, New North Carolina, Down Home. They say they're in rural areas. If you go look, they're in my countrypolitan counties. They've been actually doing work. It's going to take some time. It might be that the party has to defer to some groups that have local cred. It's like thinking about unions versus people who are supportive of workers but aren't necessarily connected to unions. We may have to have a larger, looser view of things. So there are groups growing up in North Carolina that I think could be very, very helpful. I do think, though the party is missing an opportunity to bring a lot of elected officials in these blue islands that need support, is what I would say the party can do without much money.
Does anyone, one last question, I mean, it has to be the absolute last question.
Okay, thank you. So you talk about these countrypolitan areas, and a lot of these are like economic hubs, and it's surrounding businesses.
Some of them are economically troubled, but some of them are real hubs, yeah.
So I'm from Greenville, and I famously like to say it's a suburb to nothing. And so how do you view the East, where, there's not these sort of booming populations of where people are pouring in?
Well, I mean, Democrats have a base of operation in Pitt, in Greenville, in Fayetteville, in New Hanover. That's pretty good to me. And then in some more rural counties, I think that the stereotype of Eastern North Carolina and Western North Carolina, both wastelands, is part of our mental problem that needs. Now, Pitt's an interesting place. Could Pitt build out from Pitt into other areas around it? New Hanover has the problem of Pender, and then has the problem of Brunswick, which is a huge problem in terms of Republicans. So I don't see the East anymore. Politically, I don't think of it as the East, because I see some metropolitan areas with real strength that could be a base of operation.
Thank you, Mac.